Thank you.
So welcome, Shelly Fox, California Master Beekeeper, Master Capstone Project.
Alrighty, thank you ladies for being here. My name is Shelly Fox and I'm going to be presenting on raising high quality queens for the California Bee Company. I'm going to spend a few minutes going into my background and how I got here, and then we'll dive into what I did for the project and how I did it. So back in 2010 is when I first got started into beekeeping. I knew a local lady who was raising bees. She was kind of a bee haver, you know, she had some bees in the garden, and I begged her to teach me, and she took me out to catch my first swarm. And you know, from there I just was obsessed. I started reading books, taking every class I could get my hands on, and I joined a few of the local clubs. I spent the next couple years collecting swarms like crazy because, like I said, I was obsessed. They were fascinating. And I started to realize there were a few ways to make splits at this time with my level of knowledge. And one of them was to let the bees create their own cells. You know, so when they would create swarm cells, I would divide the colony. And then I also tried walkaway splits because that's what I saw online. And you could see right away the difference in the queen cells, you know, these little tiny dinky cells versus these huge cells that the colonies were creating by themselves. So there was just no comparison. I quickly learned that I needed to work with the bees and do what the bees wanted to do. So here you can see my backyard. It filled up quickly. And it's not a very popular thing with the neighbors and the husband and kids in the backyard. Nobody wanted to play on the swing set anymore. So it was time I needed to start setting up out yards. And I never would have thought to do this, but I had a great mentor, John Chestnut, and he always stressed everybody needs an out yard. And mostly in our area, it comes down to mean bees. You know, we live in an area with Africanized bees, and so we needed spots to take our naughty bees for time out, basically, to get them requeened, or, you know, an outside location. At the same time, I was focusing on pests and disease. This was the first time I really started realizing what a problem that varroa were. So I started focusing on that, and of course the colonies were living longer because of it. At this point, I started growing out yards using purchased queens. So I knew that the swarm queens were great. I knew that the emergency queens were subpar. And so the next step for me, since I didn't know how to raise queens yet, was to start buying them. And you know, I spent thousands. I really did. I bought queens from all over the nation. I carefully monitored all of them. Every box was labeled. And while I got some really good queens along the way, I was really disappointed with the quality in some of them. And you know, I was seeing drone layers, you can see up here in this top corner, and then I was seeing real spotty patterns, or, you know, you pay $50 and she's dead when she arrives. So I was quickly disappointed, and I wanted to do it myself. So I begged a fellow club member, his name's Milan Kasparik. He is an Eastern European beekeeper that we were fortunate enough to have in our club. He'd come over here for work. And so he first taught me and my friend Nicole here. He brought us to his apiary and showed us the ropes. And he was using a swarm box, a small swarm box, and he was leaving the cells in there for the duration of their growth. So they were coming out small and barely had any jelly, but you know, I was so excited. I didn't know what I was doing yet. Anyways, I was just thrilled. We were making queens, and here's my very first graft here on the right. I think I got like a couple to take, but it didn't matter. I was just so excited. So from there, now that I kind of knew at least how to do the grafting portion on my own, I started practicing like crazy. I was online reading all the tips that everybody's saying, you got to do it this way or you got to do it that way. So I tried them all. I tried everything that everybody said was their best way to do it. I grafted with water, like a little droplet of water at the bottom of the cup. I tried royal jelly. I even tried yogurt because somebody said yogurt works. Yeah, I put the JZBZ cups in the colony 24 hours in advance and let them polish them. I waxed, dipped the cups in wax because some people said, well, the cells come out bigger if you have wax on them. And other people said, no, out of the bag is fine. So basically I tried it all and slowly started to see differences, I'm observing differences as I go. Next, I had the privilege of joining in on the Queen Rearing course at David, taught by Dr. Nino. Thank you. And that was a great experience because she introduced us to a lot of different styles and techniques out there, different tools, different ways of doing things. And she also would check our graphs. She would check every single one and eliminate all the ones that weren't right. So it really helped me focus on the size I was looking for. I didn't have that before. I was kind of going by videos. And so to have somebody right there with you being really perfectionistic about it was so beneficial for me. So I brought that information home with me and I continued practicing. I practiced with all the different styles of tools and different starters and finishers. I even, in class they said you got to brush the bees off the frame. Well, of course I want to try other ways. So I shook the bees off the frames. Why do we have to brush them? So I try shaking, and then you've noticed your larva is, over in the corner of your cell when you go to graft it. So it's quickly like, okay, she's right. She knows what she's talking about. And I quickly developed preferences. It's, you kind of have to try it all before you develop preferences. And that's what I did. During this time, I'm raising all my own queens. So now the out yards are growing huge in size. I was doing everything on my own. I averaged around 180 colonies at a time. That number goes up and down throughout the year and sales and whatnot. But I was able to be really picky with the queens I was producing as well, because I'm paying for them now, and I'm actually not really paying much because I'm making them myself. So it really just comes down to time. So I'm able to eliminate anything that looks like junk. And that's what you do when you order queens too, is you might order 20 and you might only get 1 or 2 good queens, and you're dumping the rest. And that's expensive to do. So to be able to do it on my own, it didn't hurt the wallet. And I was really starting to see traits that I liked. And the main one I was seeing was gentleness. And colony size too. Before, the bees were pretty testy. They're defensive. They're swarms, and they're swarmy. They're keeping their colony size small, so I'm not able to produce those big crops. So with the bigger size colonies, I ran into the problem of too many bees and too much honey. So I needed to start selling honey and selling nukes and selling queens so that I could continue to practice doing queens, but not have too many colonies. And from there, it led into a whole business of selling honey and, festivals everywhere, all over town. People were coming to my house, people at the meetings. And, I had to do some soul searching, but I realized I didn't like it. I did not like the business aspect of, creating labels and, the taxes and insurance, so all these little things. And I really just wanted to get back to the queens. And at the same time, I was having health problems and I wasn't able to really lift. I was able to, but I shouldn't have been lifting heavy boxes. So with a very heavy heart, I hung up my bee suit and I put the bees on the market. And it happened so fast. It was like a whirlwind, but within 3 days, every colony was purchased. I had a good name in the community, and I think people were eager to get their hands on the colonies that I had been raising. So this leads into my project. Finally, I'm sure you're waiting for that. But Jeremy Rose of the California Bee Company was the main buyer. Somebody beat him to 1 yard and bought that yard, but he came in next. I spent a day touring all the yards with him, and he pulled out his checkbook right there and would not leave the mountain until the deal was sealed. It happened so fast, I kind of wanted time to think about it, but he said, no, this happens right now. We're not leaving. I think he knew what he wanted, and he wanted it now. So I did. I sold the bees right there on the mountain, all the locations. I think there was 11 left at this time. Somebody bought one. And So I spent that, I volunteered a couple weeks working for him, just getting him up to speed on all the locations, the stock that was there, who's who, what's what, gate codes, all that kind of stuff. And this was kind of cute. This is one of his daughters here, Delilah. He had posted this on his Instagram right after he purchased the bees. He went in there immediately and selected a breeder and grafted off her, which felt good to me, for a commercial beekeeper to come in and already want to be grafting off my bees it was a compliment. So here's his beautiful family here, and they really are wonderful people, and I was just so thrilled to be working with them, I guess. So he on a kind of jokingly said, "You should raise queens for me," and I thought he was crazy because I'd only been doing it for myself. I didn't have the confidence yet. But I said, yeah, and I'll do a couple grafts for you, because it was towards the end of the season. And so this was my first graft I did for him, and it was kind of an accident. They came out darn near perfect, and it blew his socks off. And he, at that point, was like, "You're never leaving. You don't leave this company till I die." So I think you're not supposed to start with your best, because it's hard to match that again. But it happened. It was great. And so that's when, through discussing with Wendy, I decided, okay, you know what, I can do something with this. I need to build courage. I need to build, I need to practice. I need to figure out what I'm doing. So I'm going to spend the next year focusing on queens and focusing on what I can do for his company to bring him to the next level. So that's what I did. I took all the skills that I had honed in these last several years practicing with my own colonies, and I decided I wanted to take his company to the next level. I wanted to increase his queen quality, production, and the stock performance. He had great queens. They were a little on the defensive side, which is a problem because we're selling to hobbyists. But he had very hardy stock. But he had a lot of older queens. He was a very busy man. He knows how to raise queens on his own, but he was cutting a lot of corners. I was scouring his Facebook and Instagram photos and looking at the quality of his queens and noticing how I could make improvements for his company. But I discussed with him what his past purchases looked like, and he was ordering bees. I think the previous year he had ordered 150 package bees in order to make his nuke numbers up to help supply the market, because he just didn't have the time. So my goal was to increase anything related to queens, increase nuke sales, increase his ability to requeen his own colonies, his ability to make splits and increases, sales to the hobby market. I wanted to just take him to the next level. So it was pretty amazing. He paid for everything, obviously. He said, "Here are the keys to the business, basically. Have at it." So here's just a handful of the locations. I think he has 40 something locations, but of course I didn't have to work at all of them because some of them are just production locations. But these are the main locations I worked at, from Nipomo, which is a town I live in, all the way to Montana de Oro, which is an hour drive away. Those were my main yards that I worked at throughout the year. Then the next thing I'm looking at is when I'm going to start. I want the highest quality queens I can possibly get. And this means I need resources coming in, because we know that natural resources are the best resources. I can give them pollen patty, I can feed them syrup, but there's, it just doesn't beat the natural pollen coming in. And I need to see plenty of drones in production. I don't want poorly mated queens. So I was just kind of keeping an eye on the weather. This is our, annual weather here. It's pretty nice year round. So I'm just kind of keeping an eye on everything. And February 20th was the date I selected to go ahead and start my first grafts. There was tons of traits I could choose from. I was really lucky. He's got, at this point, I think he had taken about, I think he said 875 colonies to almonds. And while he's there, he keeps a pretty close eye on his bees. So he's constantly going through them. And I had him select breeders while he was there, start marking the outside of colonies for me as you're going through these. Who's looking good to you? So when he brought the bees back from almonds, I already had, 20 or so that he had narrowed down. And so then I was able to get in there with my own preferences. And of course, I put my main ones in this first column here. Gentleness was important to me. I don't like working with defensive bees. I know that, he needs a level of hardiness because he's a commercial beekeeper, but I can't be putting my name on something and sell to the community and have, defensive bees. So gentleness was one of my first traits. So he selected the main ones. I would open them up and quickly eliminate anything that didn't meet my preferences. So if I saw chalk brood or, European foul brood, if I saw anything wrong, they were immediately eliminated. These are traits that I hope to select for more in the future over here on the middle and right column. But right now, starting off, this first column was what I was mainly focusing on. And here's just some pictures of what I'm looking for. I want a really beautiful, tight, solid brood pattern. I want to see plenty of natural pollen coming in. I want to see them storing pollen. I want to see them storing plenty of nectar. I want to see larvae floating in jelly. I don't, she might be a great breeder, but the colony is just not where it needs to be right now. So basically all the stars need to line up. She's got to have a nice tight retinue. Next is starters, how I'm gonna raise these queens. And for me, there's a lot of ways to raise queens. It's kind of like I don't know, making chocolate chip cookies. There's tons of recipes out there. Some are very good, some are awful. We all like our own. So I tried it all, but mainly I'm going off the emergency impulse to start them off with. I'm either selecting a huge colony in the yard and I'm removing the queen from that colony and using that as my starter, or I'll set up a new one. If I happen to be going through nukes that day and I have tons of extra brood and I need to reduce their size, I'll go ahead and set up starters that way by pulling frames out of the nukes and shaking bees in. And then another method I used was the cloak board method, which I like, but it takes a lot of extra steps and I don't know, I think it's just a lot of extra work. So my main way of doing it is find the strongest, healthiest colonies in the yard, remove that queen, and then I start going through the colony, I remove all open brood so that I have zero competition with my grafts. Capped brood, if it's emerging and there aren't any eggs on the frame, I'll go ahead and leave it. Other times I'll remove it just if I want to put, I don't know, other frames in there, namely pollen. But the main thing is I want a massive amount of resources in there. And for us, pollen is our limiting factor. We don't get a heavy pollen flow here. So I'm constantly collecting pollen frames throughout the year or throughout the season as I'm going through nukes or whatever I'm doing. I'm constantly setting aside pollen frames because with this dry year, we just didn't have the pollen coming in like I would have liked to have seen. And then I can't stress enough nurse bees. I want them overflowing. I want them just completely bursting at the seams, overflowing with nurse bees. You cannot add enough nurse bees. And with this type of setup, I can add a large number of cells. Of course, if the least amount of cells I add, the bigger they're going to be. But because this is a commercial operation, I like to do 45 per starter if it's a large queenless starter. A couple tips is for us, reducing drift is a main one. I like to set my starters right where the large colony was to begin with. I like to keep it there. And the other trick I like to do is I can, like for this colony here as an example, I can rotate it the opposite direction. So now I've got all the foragers from this colony entering this colony. And while I know foragers are not our target in a starter, for us, they're bringing back fresh pollen, and that's what I want. I can add all the sub I want, but it is just not the same quality. So, one of my main tricks, and my boss was watching me do it one time. He's like, "Why are you doing it? We don't want foragers, we want nurse bees." And I'm like, "I know we want nurse bees, but I want this fresh pollen." And so I usually would do that. I would rotate 2 outside colonies, so I just load that center colony with foragers with all that fresh pollen coming in. If I lived somewhere else and I had tons of pollen, I wouldn't have to do that. Another little tip is using a shaker box. That way you're not shaking in extra queens. So I can put a shaker box, which is just a deep box and with an excluder on the bottom, and I can put that on top of my starter and shake in bees from all over, and not really have to worry about shaking in an extra queen, excuse me, extra queen. And of course, I can make adjustments as I go. If I let these sit for 24 hours and I come back and it doesn't look right, it's a fluid process. I can add more. I can dump more bees in. I can keep working on it till I get it where I want it. Queen rice starter. This was new for me. This was something I tested out. I didn't even think this was possible. It might have been taught in class, but I missed it. I wasn't paying attention or something. But anyways, this is pretty much how I set up my finishers. It's a double deep colony with an excluder. And then on this top box, you know, if it was set up as a finisher, I'd have all my pollen and, you know, frames of honey and everything up here. And I would put my grafts right in the center after they're already started. But with a queen rice starter, I can go ahead and just do that now. So I put my grafts in, fresh grafts, and much to my surprise, they started them, and they started them beautifully, and I was shocked. I thought, why am I making these extra starters and finishers? Why am I doing all this extra work? Well, the reason is because it doesn't always work out that way. You know, in spring, when they're in swarm mode, they're like, sure, we'll make whatever you want, give it to us. But I quickly learned it was unreliable. You know, some colonies would build anything I gave them, some wouldn't. So I quickly realized it's not as successful as I thought. And you know, it required some extra work. I'm knocking down cells, and I don't know, it's just, it wasn't reliable. But one thing that I did want to mention is it makes a great backup. So if my boss is saying, I need 50 queen cells for this class I'm going to teach, and I set up my queenless starter and I put in my grafts, I'll go ahead and do a backup graft and drop it into my finisher, which is basically a queen rice starter. So 24 hours later, I go back and I pull my grafts out of my queenless starter. And let's say it was a bad graft and I only got 30. Well, now I go to my finisher, which is a queen rice starter, and I go ahead and pull those out. And even if it's at the wrong time of year, they'll still draw some. So now I have a backup. So it's just kind of nice that I can use it as, you know, a little extra insurance, because nature doesn't always work out how you want it. The queenless starter finisher. This is a system that I use later in the season when the bees don't want to work for me. This is not ideal. I make far better queens in a queen right finisher, but you know, sometimes you have colonies that are very responsive to the environment and they just don't want to work for you, regardless of what you're trying to set up. You know, they realize, no, it's not the right time of year, and we're not going to pull cells for you, or we're not going to build as many as you're giving us. So occasionally I will switch to a queenless starter finisher, which is basically a really full colony full of nurse bees, full of emerging brood, pollen, nectar, everything you need to build good cells, but there's no queen. And the reason I do this is because they're desperate. They know they don't have a queen, and so they're more willing to do what I ask of them. At the same time, I have to give them less cells. I couldn't give them a frame of 45. We're looking at maybe 20 cells. That way I still get the same size of cell. I still get them full of jelly. It's just that I'm not asking as much from them, and they're doing it only because they're desperate and they know they're hopelessly queenless, and they don't have much of a choice. Regardless of the system I choose to put my cells in, I like to give them a rest period. You know, if it was ideal, I'd give them 48 hours, but to be honest, as quickly as the season went, it was more like, make the cell builder, put your cells in an hour later. And they do turn out really great, but if I could wait 48 hours, I noticed that at this point, the nurse bees they're desperate. They're full of jelly, and it's just like they're ready to just dump it in a cell. So it really does benefit me to be able to wait 24 to 48 hours and give them time to become desperate. But at the same time, I've got all these foragers bringing back fresh pollen, and you know, they're stocking up because they have nobody to feed it to. So here's a quick picture of how I like to set up my my starters. Everybody does it different. This is if I have just one frame of grafts. If I've got multiple frames of grafts, which I'll sometimes do, I'll remove these frames of caproot and just put more honey in. And it's shocking to see how much pollen they go through. 24 hours later, I can see frames of pollen completely depleted. It's amazing. Let's see. Oh, finisher colonies. This is where it's at. I don't care how you start up your starter. You can fix problems with your finisher. So basically, this is one of the yards I'm working at. It's a production yard, but I'm able to go around, go through all these colonies and find the strongest one I want. It's important that I'm checking for disease, pests throughout the process. You don't just want a healthy starter, but you need a healthy finisher. So usually what I would do is I would select a double like this one here that's just booming with bees. It's ready to swarm, but it doesn't have swarm cells yet. I have to go through the whole thing. I got to make sure that they're not already in the process of swarming, because that'll ruin my grafts. So once I select the finisher that I want to use, I'll put a queen excluder on top, and I will either start up a finisher box on top, which is full of pollen, nurse bees, capped brood. And the owner of the company, Jeremy, he requests open brood to be up there. I'm still experimenting with this, because sometimes I don't put the open brood up there and they turn out beautiful. So I know people say that you need the open brood up there to draw the nurse bees from down below to come up, but I'm still trying to figure that one out. It doesn't seem like it's necessary, but maybe it is. I do it because he asks me to, so I haven't had a lot of time to experiment with that, because I did one time and then he came back and said, where's the open brood? And like, oh, I'm experimenting. So anyways, I basically just have to make adjustments based on the time of the year. If it's a double deep colony, I can go ahead and put, make my finisher box on top and put my grafts in. But if it's, I come back and it doesn't seem like there's enough bees, I'll go ahead and drop the entire starter right on top. And so now I've got my massive starter on top of my massive finisher. And the cells just come out beautiful. They're just flowing with resources. Here's a quote over here by a friend of mine. I was very blessed to have him as a mentor. He's back in the Midwest, and he has the same views as me. It's quality over quantity. And so I was able to go to him for a lot of tips and pointers, and he was very helpful. So this is a quote by him. Grafting day. I prefer the Doolittle method. I prefer a Chinese grafting tool because I feel like I get that extra bit of jelly. Of course, I use the bee brush because I learned that shaking the frame wasn't the best idea. But I load up all my cell bars right there in the car. I don't have them previously polished. I didn't feel it was necessary. I didn't feel it was necessary to dip the cups in wax, so I just do them straight out of the bag onto the bar, graft, and then into the colony they go, into the starter they go. This is kind of cool. I saw this at the lab at Davis. You guys have one of these. I had one custom made for me, and it's helpful when I'm teaching a class. Like if I were to teach the Cal Poly kids how to graft, I'd go ahead and take the extra time to put my breeder queen in here. You can see her right here, and let her lay that up. I have to do it about 5 days in advance because it kind of takes them a little while to get going. You would think, the first time I did, I was like, oh, 4 days. And, the day I pull it out, they're not quite ready. So if I have extra time and I'm helping others, I'll go ahead and take the time to use this frame. Otherwise, I just search through my breeder colony and I select what I'm looking for. I know what age larvae I'm looking for. These are the locations that I would graft at. This is my fancy office here. Sometimes I'd work outside, but usually it's too warm or windy and I don't want to dry out my grafts. So I'm usually working in the car. This is the bee mobile, we call it. It's allowed to get trashed. But I have this little easel here, and I'd put the grafts on the easel and just sit in the back of the car and graft away. One thing I like to do is get the frames in right away. So I'm fairly quick at grafting now, but and it probably doesn't matter, but I'm always thinking about quality, quality, quality. You know, how can I make these the best queens I can possibly make? So I'll usually graft 3 bars, get it in the frame, get it in the colony, into my starter, and then I'll come back and I'll do the next one. You know, if it's like cold outside or whatever, sometimes I'll go ahead and graft them all and then get them all out. But usually I like to do it 1 frame at a time. It'd be great if I had an assistant. I could just hand it to them and they go put it out for me. But that's just something I've been doing, is getting them out as soon as I can. Main thing for me is good lighting so that I can select the perfectly aged larva. And of course I'm getting older, so now glasses, flashlight, whatever I need to do to make it happen. But the goal here is selecting the right age. And for me, I'm looking for something, you know, 12 hours or less. I want it as small as I can possibly get it. And I want it floating in jelly. So I'm targeting the ones that, you know, colonies have been well fed. Abundant resources. So unfortunately, this was not a year of abundant resources. So like I said, I was always collecting pollen frames, keeping them in a box in my car. But still I supplemented as a backup. So I made sub. The boss Jeremy purchased patties for me. I would always put syrup on them, just a nice light syrup, so it would mimic a flow. And of course it works best during a nectar flow, obviously. So I always had backups on everything. And it's not just on my starters or finishers, but it starts at the very beginning. It starts with the colonies that I'm selecting for drone mothers. You know, whoever's going to be supplying my drones, I want those colonies well fed. I want them babied. I want them loved and lavished upon. And the same with my breeder. So way in advance to grafting, I am giving her everything she possibly needs to have nice, juicy larvae for me to choose from. So everybody gets babied. Once my grafts go in, I swing back by the next day to check them. And this is a crucial time for me to observe how I'm doing. You know, I slowly pull the lid up, and this is what I want to see. I want to see huge clumps of bees in this shim area on the top of my starter. That lets me know I didn't have a lot of drift. I've got tons of nurse bees in there, more than I probably ever need. But I'd rather have too many than not enough. When I pull my grafts out, I want to see them completely covered in bees. This one here had the bees brushed off, just so you can see the cups. Right here, you can see my graft frame right here in the middle. It's got my name on it because I think that was one of my bars and I didn't want to get it mixed in with his. And I'm checking for acceptance. How many did I get? And not just that, I'm checking to see how they look. How much jelly do they have in them? Sometimes you pull them out and you have 100% take, but there's not very much jelly. These look okay because there's barely any wax on them, so they're probably not quite 24 hours yet. So that's about what I want to see. You know, 24 hours, I want to see almost a half cup already. If not, I need to make adjustments next time. Or sometimes I can save these by putting them on a roaring strong finisher. And this is the time I would go ahead and say, I think I'm going to put my starter, my entire starter unit on top of my finisher. That way I just added a ton more bees, and I'm not going to use this starter for a second round, because you can use them back to back if they're strong enough. But you know, if they're not full of jelly, then I'm not going to use it again. I'm going to go ahead and donate it to my finisher. 48 hours later, this is what I want them to look like in my finisher. If they don't look like this, they're not going to be the best cells that I can get. And it's hard for me to get them to look like this without putting in a ton of effort. It's very easy to make substandard cells. It takes a lot of work to make a high quality cell that's full of jelly. It really does. You know, sometimes I do everything right and they still don't come out full of jelly. So at the 48 hour point after being in the finisher, I'm evaluating them. I'm deciding what I can do better next time. But I absolutely want to see these cups full of jelly. If they're not, you know, maybe give them to a friend. I mean, not to say that I would give friends my worst, but you know what I mean. Like, don't use them for your boss's operation. Use them as seconds. Capped cells. After 10 days in the finisher, well, it'd be 9 days in the finisher, but 10 days after grafting, I'm pulling them out. I'm evaluating what they look like. They'll already have gorged, so the jelly levels will be down, but I still want to see jelly. So these cells have gorged already, or these queens have already gorged. They're probably ripe at this point, but I still see jelly in the bottom of the cup. And that lets me know that the queen ate as much as she possibly could have and still has some left over. I don't want to see a cup that is completely empty. It tells me that, yeah, maybe she had her fair share, but maybe she could have eaten a little more. And, she ate as much as, she ate every last drop and that was it. So I do like to see jelly left over. My favorite is when the cup is completely full, when it's left over, which also gives you a scare because you're wondering, did she die? Is it full of jelly because she died and never ate? So I commonly pop cells open just to check to see how they're doing, because I am still learning and I'm not totally for sure on what I'm doing all the time. The other thing I'm looking for is discolored tips. That was a problem this year, actually. A couple times I had beautiful looking cells, but the tip was dark, and I would crack them open and I'd see the larva at the bottom of the cell. And my assumption, going back, looking at starters, finishers, looking at the colony I grafted from, there was usually a problem along the line. Maybe there was a slight hint of European foul brood that I missed. It was very, very subtle. And on closer inspection, I start to notice, oh my gosh, I had problems in here and I didn't realize it. So those, of course, all get tossed out. This is what I want to see on the day my cells are going in. This is ideal. This is like 100% perfect for me. This is what I'm striving for. I'm striving for these huge cells. I want this cup full of jelly, way more than she could have ever eaten. Obviously it doesn't have to be that way. You could have a cup half full of jelly, still she ate it all. But what I notice is when they emerge, they turn around, they go back in and they eat what's left in their cup. Whether or not that is important, I don't know. Maybe she's just shy and she wants a little alone time and she's snacking on what's left of that jelly. But I do notice that they will often go back into the cell and consume what's left. And the workers will also go in there and consume it. So I do like to have some left over so that they can go ahead and chow down once they emerge. But I want to see big fat queens in there. Sometimes you crack these cells open to inspect them, and you got a tiny little queen in there, and I don't want to see that. I want to see a big fat juicy queen. This is when I'm placing cells. I learned this little sponge tip from you guys at Davis. It's very helpful. It works great when I have good weather. Otherwise, I like to leave my whole bar in a nuke. So the day I go to collect my cells, I'll grab the bar, I'll make a nuke out of it, usually pulling frames from the top box of my finisher, and then I'll turn that into a nuke at the end of the day. I'll just leave it with a cell, and so now I've just increased by one nuke. But I like to put the cells right in the center of the brood nest. I want to keep it nice and warm and toasty. It takes a little extra work to pull a frame out and do that, but I'm usually catching that day as well, so it's really not that big of a deal. Okay, so now I'm going to go through the different styles of mating nukes that I experimented with for this project. I'll try to do it quickly because I'm keeping an eye on the clock for you guys. I want to be mindful of your days. So the mini mating nuke is what is used as an industry standard. I had problems with it though, because I don't get to evaluate the queen's pattern. So, they usually open them up, they see eggs, they cage the queen. Well, that doesn't really tell me what kind of queen I'm dealing with. So I quickly learned I want more time with the queens. But real quick, these pictures, here's my mini mating nukes. Sometimes one would be more popular than others, and there would be drift. I had this box custom made to get my mini frames drawn out, which was kind of cool. And I would put it between two boxes of brood, so they wouldn't fill them with honey. Otherwise, if I dropped them on top, they like to fill them with honey, which is great, but it's not what I was. I need bees and brood. Then I experimented with these half frames, which were actually really cool because I got a much better view of the queen's performance. which was great, but they're not, no, what's the word? They're not compatible with the rest of the equipment I'm using. So basically they would be dedicated just for this. I couldn't turn this into a nuke and sell it. So as nice as these were and as fun as they were to work with, it wasn't right for his operation. He happened to have a whole bunch of these 3-frame queen castles that he wasn't using. So I decided to go ahead and get them into circulation. I think there was 66 of them we set up, which gave me like 100, I don't know, what was it, like 190 something, 198 extra nukes basically. They weren't my preference, but I had really made too many queens one time and I needed a place to put them. So we went ahead and got these 3 ways into circulation. Here we go. This is my preference. This is what I love using for raising queens. It uses a ton of resources, so it wouldn't be ideal in just a queen rearing situation, but for a commercial beekeeper who's looking for high quality queens for just himself, he's not just trying to crank queens out. This was ideal because he can sell these nukes, but it also gives us time to evaluate how the queens are doing. So we would either use a 5-frame or 4-frame, usually 4-frame. If I use 5-frame, I have to use a jar feeder on top. You can kind of see it in the corner here. But this turned out to be the ideal recipe for us, I guess you'd call it. You know, it gives me enough bees to take care of my queen cell and, you know, to tend to her, to feed her well, to keep her warm. They're pretty self-sustainable because they're bringing in their own resources. He likes me to put a little bit of syrup on them the day I put the cell in. He feels like it increases acceptance of that cell. And he's probably right on that. Here's catch day. I'm evaluating the queens I'm seeing. I want to see nice, big, hardy queens. I want to see tight retinues. I want to see beautiful patterns like this. I don't want to see any spotty drones mixed in, and that might be on the next slide. Here's the sponge that holds all the queen cells if I decide to use that, or you know, sometimes I'll transfer them to the nuke from the nuke frame that I'm holding them in to keep them warm. I'll transfer them to this right before I go put the cells in. But here's my little fancy cardboard box I carry around. I'll fill this section with the cages, and you know, we collect propolis. The goal right now is a 5-gallon bucket. I think we're up to a gallon right now, so it's going to be a couple more years. Okay, so this is what I was talking about. This is why I love these 5-frame nukes. I can't see this in a mini mating nuke. All I can see is eggs in my mini mating nuke. But I give them plenty of time. We had enough of these running that I was able to let them go ahead and lay up full frames and let some of these bees emerge so I could evaluate the queen's offspring before caging her for his operation. So I was really able to get a good sense of what their temperament was going to be like. I could see what her pattern was going to look like before caging her. And, you know, I can see if there's any pest or disease present, namely chalkroot. I hate seeing that. So anything with chalkroot immediately gets removed. But the most important thing here with these full frames is I can spot problems. You know, this is obviously a poorly mated queen, if at all. You know, I do see worker brood mixed in there, but you know, she's obviously going to be quickly eliminated. I would never cage something like that and give it to the boss. But the nice thing, like on a frame like this, is every once in a while I'll pull a frame out that looks beautiful, but I'll see a drone here or here or here, you know, just a few mixed in. And at first I thought, well, that's not a big deal, you know, just a couple. She misfired in a couple cells, but I quickly realized once you cage that queen and put her into another colony, that situation doesn't get better, it gets worse. So having these full frames and being able to evaluate any early signs of problems was great. So now if I pull out a, you know, a full sheet of brood like this and it looks amazing, but they're nasty, you know, their temperament's spicy, she's gone, she's done. I'm able to be picky like that. Or if I see a couple drones, she's gone, she's done, she gets immediately replaced. There's tons of styles of cages on the market. I went with these California mini cages because my boss happened to buy a box of 1,500 of them. So it was a no-brainer. That's what I'm using. I like them a lot because they fit right into the, between frames, so you don't have to mess up bee space. And we leave the attendants on the outside. You can leave them on the inside or the outside. I would do this if I was selling one to a customer. I'd leave them on the outside for us, or if I was selling a bulk purchase of them. The other important thing about keeping the queens healthy and I don't know, high quality, I suppose, is how you tend to them after you cage them. Often I'd have 50 in one batch that I'm giving to my boss, and obviously he can't use that many at once, so they need to be banked what I call long term, but we're talking no longer than a week or two max. The sooner those bees are in their colony, the better. So the rule for me is only cage as many as you're going to use in a very, very short amount of time. So here I would use a shipping box if I knew he wanted queens that day. So I'm out catching and I'm communicating with him, and he says, I need 20 queens. I'm going to go to the valley today. So I would go ahead and cage them fresh that day, put them in a shipping box, dump a bunch of nurse bees on them, usually jam a piece of comb in there with honey on it or something, so they have something to eat for the day. And I'd send them off with that. If I'm banking them overnight, I'll go ahead and set up a clean bank. The key here is massive amounts of nurse bees to take care of all those queens, a massive amount of resources to feed them, and really watching my temperatures on these. We kind of ran into some problems a few times. Uh-oh, I see company coming. So I lost my train of thought because somebody's in the driveway. And they're going to come to the door and I can't talk right now. Sorry. The main thing here is not too hot, not too cold. I was noticing I was having a lot of drift on these, and so I was closing the entrance. Well, then my queens were overheating and we started noticing problems down the line. So it's like, oh my gosh, I just ruined all these queens. So then we started using screen bottom boards and all these different tricks just to, they're like Goldilocks bees, not too hot, not too cold. They got to be just right. So that's what I would do with the banks, is make sure the temperature stayed. Thank you. Okay, so not everything goes perfect. Obviously, there are problems that came along with the success. Rogue Queens was something I always had to look out for. I could not miss a teeny tiny little itty bitty dinky emergency cell, or I would ruin all my hard work. This is what I was mentioning earlier with finding dead larvae slumped at the bottom of the cell. Wasn't able to determine if this is black queen cell virus or if this was European foul brood being fed to these. But I would see an entire batch like this, nice big fat cells, but a bunch of them are either torn down or missing, which is my first clue that something's not right. And they're also full of jelly. So I always pop a few open to see what's going on. And on this frame, they were all like this. They were dead at the bottom. I wish I knew what the exact problem was or how to prevent it, but I'm not quite there yet. I'm still working on that. Another issue is bees that just don't want to cooperate. Some colonies, Italian colonies, they'll do whatever I ask of them, which is great. I love that. But other colonies, he has a lot of Russian colonies, and they're a little more responsive to their environment, and they're like, no, we don't need 45 queens right now. So sometimes, they just didn't want to cooperate, or lack of resources, or whatever's going on in their environment. Bad things happen. Over here, there's just a whole frame that I took apart, and they were all duds, so I had to throw them away. And this is my own little joke. We call it Murph Bee's Law. And there's a lot of Murph Bee's laws that we have discovered along the way. But, if something can go wrong, it probably will eventually. So here we are. This is like ideal. This is like the best of the best for me. So far, this is the best I can do. This is 100% take, which is very challenging to do. I think I did it maybe 3 times the entire season. And I was ecstatic about it because in my, 4 years previous to this project, I had never done it. So to have that happen this year was really exciting. But the best part was my boss just happened to be there that day. He happened to be standing right next to me when I pulled him out, and even he smiled. So to be able to impress my boss was great. And even he took a picture with the bees. He was so excited. I think he was gonna, or with the frames, I think he was in cells. I think he was gonna tell everybody he did it. I don't know. But anyways, that was priceless that day. So here we are at the end of the season. In October, the first week of October, I called it a season. I was starting to notice on my previous catch, there was more problems that I was noticing. So I knew it was time to call it quits for the year. We just didn't have the drone availability anymore. I was starting to see more drones pop up in my sheets of brood, which lets me know that she's not adequately mated. So it was time to call it quits. I grafted a few more batches and basically just went around and fixed any problems I saw. I didn't pull queens at this point. I'm just fixing problems, getting everybody buckled down for winter. The one thing I like to do at this time of year is do forced supersedures. So I go ahead and, I might pull out that frame. It looks pretty good, but there's a few drone brood mixed in with the worker brood. Instead of pinching that queen and giving them a new one, I'll go ahead and give them a cell, leave the queen in there, give them a cell, but protect it with either a cell protector or I'll use foil. And, they can still tear that cell down, or they can kill her when she emerges, or that virgin can kill the mated queen. But oftentimes I find that they kind of work together for a little bit because they know this is it, we need a queen. And so they're either going to keep their original mated queen, or they're going to go ahead and let this new queen get mated, come back, and then decide who's better. Maybe that's just my personal thought of what they do, but that's my opinion, is that they're kind of smart at this time of the year, and they'll go ahead and have two in there until they decide what's best going to get them through the winter. So now that the project's complete, I'm looking at what I did over the season, and it was a total of 837 hours to get these queens made for him. And I tracked my mileage at 5,708 miles, which was quite a bit. You can see in some months, April was our main queen rearing month, I think. It's on the next slide. But in June, I was helping with other projects, so those hours kind of got mixed in. But I made myself a little too helpful, I guess. And so he was putting me to work on all kinds of projects, helping with honey harvest, treating for mites, that sort of thing. Here we are with the queen production. This is the monthly layout. April was our largest month. We really pushed it that month. We had a lot of nukes that I wanted to get prepared. So we raised a shocking amount of queens that month. It was great. And then we tapered off after that. His average was, I want 50 queens a week at this point, and for his own operation, just for him to be going around requeening, making splits, making increases. So that was great for him. He was really able to fix the quality of his stock. In the past, he had a lot of random dead outs, and we were able to fix that, so now you can go in a yard and everybody's up and running. There aren't problems. And he's not having to buy queens to do this. So that was great. This next chart, this is great. This is where I really got to see my hard work. I'm gonna move this over here. Mating nukes. At the start of this, the previous year in 2019, I believe he had 90 mating nukes. And at the peak of our season, I had 430 going that I was managing by myself. So that was great. We always had queens. It was wonderful. It was a lot of work, but it was great. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we had the 66 three-ways, the 198 queen extra nukes. So after the peak of the season, after we got that push for nuke sales out of the way, I was able to turn those all into singles, which increased his single count by 66 colonies that he can now take to almonds. And we checked them recently. They look really good. So nuke numbers went down later in the season, but colony counts went up. Nukes sold more than doubled. He gave me the financial breakdown of it, which I don't want to share here. I want to kind of keep this business private, but they more than doubled in sales this year. It was phenomenal. not because he couldn't do it, but because he didn't have the time in the years past. So now he had somebody making the nukes for him, running the website, contacting customers, getting these nukes sold. So it was great. It was great for his business. It made him a lot of money. Colony counts went way up. The business had been pretty stale at this point. He had been managing about the same number every year. It was, he was sustainable, but he wasn't growing. So colony counts this year went way up. I was able to help him make a lot of these splits, help him secure new locations, help him, get the queens installed, go back, check the queens, doing all the knockdowns on queen cells. So this was huge. This was a huge amount of growth from him. He went from, I want to say, what did he say, 1,200 colonies up to around 1,800 colonies this year because he had the queens available. His need for external queen purchases went to zero. I think the year prior he had ordered, I forget how many he said he ordered. Looks like it's around, I think he said he ordered 50 in addition to the 150 packages, something like that. So he didn't have to do any ordering of external queens except for bringing in new genetics, which we do every year, or he does every year. And then the need for package bees was completely eliminated. He didn't have to buy any package bees this year. Over here. So, what the last chart showed was an increase in mating nukes by 377%. That's at the peak of the season. That dropped down to, I forget the number. It dropped down by the end of the season, but it was still more than like double from the previous year. This was after we got rid of the 100 or the 66 three-ways. We increased the overwintering nukes for him, which is huge because he does go to almonds. And so now he's got 55% more mating nukes that are overwintered here that I'll be pulling those queens for in early February, or well, sometime in February, depending on weather, that he'll be able to use for his business. So he's going to have a whole bunch of early queens ready to go. And that worked out really well. I did that for him last year. So being able to double that number was great. The nuke sales went up by 123%. That was huge. That's not completely because of me. The previous year was COVID. So, I think that was a factor as well. Not as many people were buying queens or buying packages of nukes at that time. So part of it was people were getting out and about again, but also we had made way more, and he was able to advertise them for the entire season rather than just in the spring. His colony counts went up by 58%. And again, completely eliminated the need to order queens and to order package bees. So that was the project in all. And do you guys have any questions? Or
thank you, Shelly. That was a very educational presentation, which I sincerely appreciated. And my curiosity lies in how do you determine gentleness? What describe, please, for us what gentle traits you're looking for in your queen production.
Sure. So this is an obvious one for me because I am in an Africanized area, and my start was with swarms, and all my yards were built off swarms. So I already knew what a defensive bee was like, and I knew I didn't enjoy working with them. So for me, gentleness, I broke it down into levels, and I call them nosy bees. So when I crack a lid and the bees completely ignore me, like I don't even exist, that's my goal. That's what I'm looking for. I want these bees that completely ignore me and just continue with their business. The next level are what I call the nosy bees. They come up to see what you're doing. They're like at the top bars, they meet you at the top bars, they're looking, they're always watching you, which is fine. They can still be gentle, but they're a little bit nosier, and they're a little more alert to what you're doing. And then the next level are the ones that pour out the sides or come at you, or they're, if it's really bad, they'll crawl up your sleeve. So for me, basically, is when I crack a lid, I don't want bees coming at me. And ideally, I want them just going about their business. They don't even change what they were doing. They just keep on working. I'm not disrupting them at all. But with this comes, there's always a plus and a minus. So if your bees are too calm, I realize, what am I giving up? Are these bees going to let yellow jackets fly right in their entrance also? So it seems like there's a give and take with everything. But for right now, I'm just selecting the ones that are very gentle. Basically mind their own business and let me do what I need to do, and I leave them alone as well. So I
Oh,
hope that
thank you.
answers your question.
Yeah, yeah. I like the three levels of how you're discerning that. Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah, no, I know. I worked with the Africanized bees down south, and they're no fun. The ones that, as you said, like the ones that just come right at you when you open the
Yeah.
lid. It's
Or they
insane.
go right for the wrist. How do they know to do that? It's like they know that the elastic is there. They can just smell their way in. How do they do that? It's amazing.
Behind you. No, the presentation was awesome, and you clearly have done a ton of work. That was really nice to see the results that you got at the end, so it was awesome. But when we talk about queens, I always wonder about the drones,
Yes.
because we need a lot of drones to have all of those queens mated. So can you talk a little bit about what you've learned this year about drone production and maybe what you're planning on doing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so this year the main focus was on queens, starters, and finishers. What I quickly realized is the yards that had nearby large yards of production colonies had the best mated queens. We had the best return. So, one yard, it's the key, we call it the Kiwi yard. Not far away is a friend of ours who's a beekeeper, but his focus is on mite resistance right now. And so all the drones in his yards come from very defensive stock. He's bringing in queens from Texas, and he's doing everything he can to focus on resistance to mites, or tolerance, I suppose. So I quickly noticed, and this was such a bummer, the very first graft of the year, I used a very gentle Italian queen because I knew I was targeting the hobby market. Well, I started getting reports that these big, fat, bright, plump, yellow, sweet Italian queens were coming back really spicy, and I couldn't figure out what on earth is going on. Like, how can I have this beautiful Italian queen and she's acting like an Africanized queen? And that's when we realized, oh gosh, our friend is right around, his yard is a mile away and he's got all these mean bees. So that was my first observation, and it was unfortunate because we didn't want to use those queens for the hobby market. The next observation, like I said earlier, was the location of other colonies or other yards. And so our best mated yard was in, or our best success yard was in, it's in San Luis Obispo, but it was within a couple miles of 3 very large production yards that we had already been putting in our own stock at. And so now we've got really good stock at these 3 nearby yards, and then the queens at the mating yard are just coming, they're mating beautifully. We're getting these big, fat, well-mated queens that we're seeing the temperaments we want to see. So I quickly realized drones is something we need to focus on more, not just their nutrition, but their background as well. So the focus for next year is going to be more on drone mothers. How can we line up our mating yards in proximity to our drone mothers to increase the genetics that we want to see? Unfortunately, we live in a it's a good thing, but we're just saturated with feral colonies here. We're saturated with beekeepers catching swarms. So finding these ideal locations is a challenge, but it's definitely something that I'm interested in working on, and I can already see the results when you do have yards nearby versus relying on the feral populations. So yeah, that's on the list of goals for next year.
Okay, no, that's awesome. And as I said, I'm glad you're going to focus on that because that's so important and people tend to forget about it. So thank you. Thanks, Shelly.
Sure.
Yeah, we appreciate your time, and thank you, and welcome to your master certification. You are a master of the California Master Beekeeper program.
Yay! Yeah. Oh, that makes me so happy. Thank you. Thank you very much.